Masterclass Creatives, and in this video we'll discuss one of the most critically acclaimed directors in the 3D animation industry, and why he was fired from his production designer and art director roles on the Spider-Verse franchise. Many of our students are curious about the origins of the now iconic Spider-Verse franchise's designs and art style approach. We'll take a look at how pre-production art tests were created for the Spider-Verse before it became the hit it is today, and how Alberto Mielgo had a major impact on the final look of the graphic stylized 3D animation that has inspired several other big studio productions to push the 3D medium to new levels. In this video, we'll discuss how Mielgo got started in the 3D animation feature film industry, why he was fired from his directorial role on the Spider-Verse after completion of what would be internally called the animation test, and how he creates his now famous signature painted look in 3D worlds. It will also dive into his process of some of his Oscar, Emmy, and Annie Award winning projects that have been sweeping the animation industry into a brand new artistic revolution over the past decade. Mielgo has earned some of the highest marks and accolades in art direction for the animation industry, but his initial path did not start with instant success. He began as a 2D animator, but faced challenges when the animation industry shifted from traditional pencil and paper techniques to computer-generated animation. Despite these obstacles, Mielgo, being self-taught, transitioned to painting and creating concept art for commercial and film projects. He also exhibited his paintings in galleries and made a living from his art. Ultimately, Mielgo's diverse artistic journey led him to become a recognized art director in the animation industry.
And he was like, "Who is the art director?" And I was like, me. I'm the art director. So that's how I become an art director, just by telling people.
Mielgo's style is described as restless, graphic, and defiant, showcasing a mature artist who is confident enough in their painting skills to challenge established norms. Today, he is still venturing independently, notably rejecting typical computer-generated imagery and choosing to return to traditional animation techniques. His philosophy is centered around exploring 2D animation through fine art and traditional techniques, prioritizing handmade methods over computer-based approaches. His platform showcases experimental short animations that break down reality into color blocks, emphasizing chromatic details from everyday life to create visuals that are described as both rich and lurid. These animations exhibit stylistic flexibility and demonstrate a mastery of color. Technically, the works are characterized by frenetic brushstroke and visible construction lines, resulting in an agitated balance that translates into trembling motion when animated. The overall effect of this approach is described as intense, fierce, and nearly feral. Mielgo maintains a strong connection to physical material, and following the principles of his artistic beliefs, limits the use of CGI. This avoidance of CG is a key aspect of his artistic approach. For the short The Witness, it was a film that Alberto wrote, directed, and designed for the animation anthology series Love, Death, and Robots. For the film, the team intentionally avoided copying existing animation styles, aiming for a unique approach that doesn't fit neatly into categories like anime, Disney, or Pixar. Instead, their primary artistic principle was on impressionism, which they defined as capturing what the eye perceives in a single glance. This principle served as their guide for the art communicated by the painters and animators on the project. They strive for graphic realism, contrasting methods seen with Pixar's detailed rendering, arguing that much detail is not necessary. In The Witness, paintings appear rich but are actually simplified upon closer inspection. Similarly, characters are designed with simplified, almost alien-like features to contribute to a mysterious visual style, avoiding cartoonish elements. This makes the viewer find the visual style perplexing, sensing a lack of conventional realism, and ultimately it functions similarly by focusing on the essential elements needed to create a realistic impression. The Witness is 100% hand-keyed animation. Due to the heightened realism of the subject matter, viewers mistakenly believe it uses motion capture instead of keyframe animation. While Disney and Pixar animations feature unrealistic character proportions, they achieve realism through genuine acting and movements based on real-life references. In The Witness, animators also utilize video reference to capture nuances and details through keyframing each critical pose. Marvelous Designer was used to visually define character personalities through clothing. The software is not typically suited for studio pipelines or complex animations like wearing a jacket or getting undressed, due to its primary purpose in catwalk simulations. They chose it for its realistic cloth dynamics. They found the natural and somewhat uncontrollable movement of simulated clothing and marvelous designer to be ideal for the project. To integrate it into their workflow, they developed a custom pipeline involving various techniques, including camera-specific adjustments to ensure proper cloth behavior within the frame. Ultimately, they were satisfied with the natural and aesthetically pleasing movement achieved in the final result. Their surfacing artist was responsible for creating realistic yet graphically stylized shading that enhanced the clothes' appearance, aligning with the project's overall artistic direction of being both realistic and graphic. Their approach to lighting in the project was unique in the fact that they used paintings for backgrounds instead of traditional 3D sets. Lighting plays a significant role in 3D animation, where typically characters are lit with 3D environments, reacting to set lighting and bounce lights. However, in this project, due to the use of paintings, Alberto provided the paintings to the lighting team, describing how he painted it and where the light source was coming from. For exterior scenes, Alberto painted them first, then collaborated with the team to integrate characters into the painted scenes so that the character lighting realistically matched the lighting in the paintings, even in overcast conditions. A key aspect of their technique involved manually adjusting exposure levels of each shot after rendering. This was done to simulate the dynamic exposure changes of a real camera, such as overexposure or reactions to fast-moving subjects. They aimed to create a sense of realism and to make the camera and lens feel alive. This manual process involved color manipulation, filters, and color mixes, which were all crucial in achieving a realistic and artistically crafted look, despite the digital nature of the animation. The Witness would go on to win 3 Emmys and an Annie Award. It's regarded as his most personal film. For the Watch Dogs Legion trailer, Alberto wanted to capture the game's universe in an aggressive night and visionary, almost scary style. He aimed to maintain the beauty of London while incorporating oppressive elements to reflect a society heading in the wrong direction.
We paint a lot of the environments based on photographs that I bring from the trips.
Storyboards played a critical role in creating the animatics for the cinematic sequences. The animatic would become a very close representation of the final cinematic. Critical shot decisions and character actions were planned throughout the storyboarding and animatic creation stages. Following the animatics, 3D models were created based on his design, shading, and creating the final 3D character renderings. Environments were hand-painted using photographs from location trips. Character designs involved collaborating with a stylist to determine personality through clothing, with a focus on realistic cloth simulation and movement. Keeping true to his style, the animation was targeted for realism using actor references. Video reference was used to portray human motion accurately. Multiple cameras and video reference source material was used for actions as well as acting for shots in the cinematic. He wanted to emphasize the origin of movement, with weight distribution to achieve realistic proportions and motion. Like his past work, he wanted to simplify unnecessary details and prioritize realistic properties. Jibaro was made by over 170 individuals and took 1 year and 7 months to complete. For the design of the female character, Alberto was heavily inspired by folklore from various countries, including India, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. The design incorporates diverse cultural jewelry and assets traditionally worn by women in different tribes and cultures. The central concept was to create a figure so adorned with gold and treasure that the woman's form is almost obscured. The intention was to present an overwhelming visual beauty that captivates and potentially distracts from the individual beneath the ornamentation. Alberto created several original paintings for the project to set the tone and style. An animatic with storyboards created by Alberto was done prior to the full production and was one of the most important processes for his films. Through his storyboarding process, he aims to define absolutely everything as accurately as possible, providing a nearly perfect guide to how each scene will last, how many individuals will work on each scene, how much each scene will cost, what lenses they will be using, how much animation will be needed, what actions are needed, and what acting is necessary for the production. He also prefers to work directly with the Adobe Creative Suite in his production process, jumping from Photoshop to After Effects, and compiling shots together inside Premiere. Since the film lacks dialogue, to communicate the spell's effect, dancing was chosen as the representation. Jibaro continues Alberto's approach to animation, moving away from typical heroic narratives and instead explores the topic of toxic relationships. For the keyframe movement, he aimed for a realistic animation style, achieved by filming real actors capturing genuine emotions, facial expressions, and body mechanics. A choreographer and dancers were employed to refine the movements as video reference. A Renaissance knight, typically known for masculinity and dignity, becomes extremely loose after the spell's influence, as the spell causes his body to move in a looping dance with violent behavior. Alberto focused on human movement and the intensive workload including design, world building from scratch, character modeling, surface artists, and rigging. To achieve an authentic natural environment for the animation, Alberto went on location to a forest for 2 weeks to observe and capture the sounds and colors of nature, aiming for an homage to nature in the film.
I also wanted to do a homage to nature.
They also reinvented Renaissance Parade of Nights, exploring color and its reflection on surfaces in 3D animation. With 3D animation, there was a heightened advantage in creating elaborate costumes and jewelry without the constraints of real-world actors. Jibaro is yet another example of Alberto's interest in exploring cinema through animation, breaking barriers, and embracing freedom to tackle adult themes within the medium. Jibaro would go on to win 2 Emmys and 1 Annie Award. Alberto's passion project, the Windshield Wiper, was created without a budget and released as a non-commercial venture. It was neither a thriller nor a full fantasy film, but what he called an impossible utopia in animation. The film was created in spare times, overtimes, undertimes, and self-financed. A significant number of artists and collaborators and friends of Alberto's, or simply artists that liked his work and shared similar values for the message of the film and wanted to be part of the project, joined in on the creation process. Alberto describes his art as being rooted in Impressionism, which he believes helps to avoid the uncanny valley effect often seen in animation. Impressionism focuses on capturing the essence of a scene with minimal, essential details, and mirrors how the human eye perceives reality, focusing sharply on what is directly looked at, while the periphery remains vague. This approach creates a better visual experience by allowing the eye to complete the image with just hints of detail. In contrast, typical CGI films are overloaded with hyper-realistic details, like pores and hairs, causing the viewer to be potentially overwhelmed and difficult to process. Alberto's simplified style applied to characters, animation, and colors. It wasn't a deliberate attempt to avoid the uncanny valley, but rather a natural outcome of their background and his ability to create hyper-realistic art. Typically, storyboards are created first, with sought-out locations that match the pre-drawn shots. In contrast, for the film The Witness, his approach was reversed. He first wrote the script, then scouted locations in Hong Kong to find shots, and subsequently created storyboards based on the chosen locations and camera angles. For the Windshield Wiper, he employed a mixed approach, where some locations were found first, influencing the storyboards, while for other parts, ideas came first, requiring storyboards to be created and then locations to be found to fit those storyboarded moments. Typically, Alberto does all the art himself, the character designs, and the environment paintings. In past projects like The Witness, he worked with a team of artists who share a similar artistic style. The collaborative approach allows him to take on large projects. Instead of handling 100% of the artwork, he focuses on smaller portions, such as 25 to 50% of the landscape paintings, relying on other skilled artists to contribute in a similar style to his own. His larger projects require much larger teams who are capable of maintaining a consistent art style to his own. For the realistic style and subject matter, subtle animations were targeted over exaggerated animation. The belief was that people in real life don't move excessively, and that mainstream animation often overuses exaggerated movements like constant balancing and over-anticipated actions, which happens a lot in mainstream animations that are mainly targeted for families or for kids. Alberto would use himself and friends as references, filming their movements for animators to follow closely. He would emphasize capturing the right timing and realistic subtlety, often just focusing on subtle breathing for character animation. He felt that for realistic and mundane subjects, less movement is more effective. The project would go on to win an Oscar at the Academy Awards, winning Best Animated Short Film. Alberto has completely revolutionized the 3D animation space, and our projects and courses have directly been inspired by his contributions in the industry. His revolutionary approach to hand-painted backgrounds, on-location research scouting for ideation, and graphic characters mixed with video reference are an extremely refreshing take in the world of 3D animation. Our instructor's goals are to provide insights on his unique artistic approach of mixing hand-drawn painted textures, 2D animated effects, along with the use of Maya for rigging and animation, perfecting the mix of using industry-standard software while bringing personal artistic touches to help our students push their 2D and 3D art, giving them a unique edge to modern-day asset creation. Roughly 3 years prior to the 2018 release of Into the Spider-Verse, Mielgo was hired by Sony as the production designer and art director for the project and would direct a little clip that would later end up being called the animation test. In the early stages, he was given significant autonomy to explore the world of Spider-Man, including its comics, cinematography, and style, with the goal of creating something exceptional and distinct, breaking the repetitive and very successful look and pipeline that all the big animation studios had been creating for several decades, making it difficult for viewers and artists to be able to differentiate one studio look from another. His initial work involved intensive painting, drawing, designing, and storyboarding. Sony was reportedly very positive about the initial results. He was given considerable creative freedom and resources, including the opportunity to hire a team of his favorite artists and collaborators. They also utilized a Spider-Man suit for character references and undertook location scouting trips to restricted areas in New York City to gather visual inspiration. The animation test ended up being just a few clips to explore the technique and the style. A highly skilled team including hundreds of artists, producers, animators, directors, storyboard artists, 2D artists, modelers, and assistants in the creative pipeline. After roughly 1.5 to 2 years, Alberto Mielgo was fired due to creative and technical differences with Sony. This would be a very unexpected and difficult time for Mielgo and his team. He quickly left the studio and will later share his thoughts online. Despite his departure, he acknowledged the hard work of the original art team involved in the entire project. He emphasized the collaborative nature of animation and fully recognized the film as a successful collective effort. His initial vision contributed directly to the final product, which aimed to be different from typical mainstream 3D animation. He would go on to share his thoughts as being listed as a visual consultant in the ending credits of the film being a result of poor legal advice. He continues to be grateful to Sony for their initial investment and congratulates everyone involved on their franchise's successful and positive reception worldwide.
We didn't even have a director assigned at the time, and they basically called me to explore what Spider-Man could look like in animation. We had a very first draft of the whole script, and I basically was just having fun. Like, let's explore comic books, let's explore the texture of comic books, like the balloons.
Next, we'll dive into some of the technical approaches to the look of the early pre-production 3D assets and art for the early development of the animation test during Mielgo's art direction for the project. A technique was developed during pre-production for modeling 2D drawings and paintings in 3D while preserving their original characteristics. This method allowed the models to be rigged, lit, and integrated into a standard movie pipeline. For the 3D model of the original Mary Jane, they aimed to continue the concept process to mimic a painting based on the original 2D concept art by Alberto. A complex aspect to the design was the rendering of the hair while respecting the painted style look, ensuring the entire head, once completed, could be simulated while still retaining a painterly aesthetic. The process included intentionally inserting minor imperfections, such as a small speck on the eye, which, despite being potentially visible only in extreme close-ups, are considered artistic inputs. Other details being added included faint lines that might represent remnants of erased paint and floating specks of color. These elements aim to contribute to a painterly feel by incorporating the subtle details found in traditional paintings onto the 3D model. The techniques for creating comic book ink lines in 3D had its own specific position and space, causing its appearance to vary depending on the camera angle. For example, a single abstract line would effectively represent a beard, so if one was to hide the 3D volume, the viewer would not be able to distinguish the character as 3D or 2D. This method represented a way to achieve the visual effect of looking like a drawing within a 3D environment. A technique was also developed for the principles of the ink line when applied to the paint of the 3D model. This involved detaching elements of the painted texture, such as the goatee, beard, and brow, giving them their own dimension. This approach created a unique visual style, where without camera movement, the scene appears as if painted from a single perspective. Adding lights introduces shadows, which would then give the character a three-dimensional feel, although the decision could also be made to eliminate shadows from certain elements. Lines could be made transparent, while other parts rendered with ink or colored ink. The lines could also follow the model's movements during speech. The modeling style aimed to make everything look like paper. The models lacked true volume, often appearing as slightly curved surfaces. They were designed to look disconnected, sometimes with visible gaps, with the potential for transparency between parts. The disconnected look would be resolved with transparency in the final model to allow for rigging and animation. Ink lines were intentionally floated to enhance the painted look. The models consisted of single surfaces with no back faces. Lines such as those for a specific character are consistently black. Ultimately, the modeling style prioritized achieving a particular visual aesthetic reminiscent of a painting rather than employing fundamentally traditional modeling techniques. Exterior environments also appeared as a painting. To achieve the look, they modeled elements such as a lump on a wall as a series of rough brushstrokes. When modeling objects like a lamp, they maintained the correct volume such as a perfect circle. However, they intentionally introduced gaps in the model to simulate the effect of imprecise brushstrokes, resulting in a broken surface. The overall objective was to integrate a 3D object that looks like a painting into an environment. To create 3D models from a painting, it would involve modeling each flat color seen in the painting by giving it dimension based on the painting's perspective. Every shape was meticulously created from the painting so the 3D object would have the feeling of a painting when viewed up close. Panels are intentionally kept disconnected and non-parallel, and the overall structure, including shelves and borders, are modeled unevenly to introduce visual interest and avoid a mechanical appearance. Lighter tones are used on inside panels to simulate highlights. Small details are given their own dimension to enhance the 3D effect when the camera moves around the object. A method involving Photoshop levels was used to create a sense of dimension in 3D space. Each green or dark area in the scene is represented by floating geometric objects in 3D space, retaining the background green color from the original painting. The process essentially takes the levels from the image and converts them into a 3D environment. This helped give the impression of viewing a painting when the camera is still. Utilizing paintings from Alberto, 3D models were built directly from the painting, incorporating its perspective and distortion, and are also sculpted on the reverse side. The overall aim was to translate a painting into a 3D object that retains the aesthetic of painting from any viewpoint, while also possessing the three-dimensionality of an irregular object. This was the overall approach to other props and background pieces on the project to retain the 2D elements of the concept art paintings in 3D spaces, which ultimately was what made the Spider-Verse franchise groundbreaking for its visual style, which would go on to influence several other 3D animated projects from larger studio productions. Storyboards and animatics were created and timed by Alberto for the team to explore the convergence of comic book and cinematic languages. Only 4 shots were completed for the test, which proved to be an exhausting process for the entire art team. The shots created with the technical team were considered impressive and served to establish a pipeline and open doors to the possibilities for the overall look of the film. Several of the early storyboard shots were retained in the final film, attributing directly to the team's inspiration and care for Alberto's vision. Alberto also designed the logo for Miles, which was intended for various marketing materials. The logo was originally created using spray paint on large paper cards, and its hand-drawn imperfections were intentionally preserved. The design was inspired by the anarchy symbol. According to Andy Levitin, an associate editor on the film, a specific glitch in a shot originated from the animation test directed by Alberto. Alberto was asked to art direct the first half of the Beatles rock band intro. The long panning intro was all based directly on paintings and designs of Alberto. He was given creative freedom to channel his trademark style and produce color keys and layout for the first section of the masterwork. He put together a crew of animators and assistants for the work of the London animation scene, where he also directly contributed to the look and design of the background visuals. His graphic pre-production paintings made a huge impact on the look and design of the final animated cinematic intro. It's amazing to see that his signature approach to environment studies and graphic paintings can be seen even in these early works. Alberto's career began working on the animated series Tron Uprising in 2012, where early traces of his current visual style can be seen. Disney was looking for a unique digital style for the series, and Alberto was the ideal candidate for the production. He would create color scripts for the look of the project and would direct several artists on creating additional key art for the TV series. Several of these artists would continue on to create concept art for many of his later award-winning shorts and early contributions to the original design styles of the Spider-Verse. The 3D animation was done overseas in Autodesk Maya, and many of the 3D assets had a similar hand-drawn graphic outline texture on the 3D characters similar to the Spider-Verse. Work on this project heavily paved the way for Alberto's hand-painted characters, which would inhabit a large portion of his body of work. The show would go on to win both an Emmy and an Annie Award. Alberto directed and wrote the story for Bungie's Marathon Reveal cinematic short. The team of 155 individuals worked on the cinematic for nearly a year. Alberto was inspired by the designs from Joseph Cross and his team at Bungie. Brandon Cronenberg's sci-fi thriller Possessor was confirmed by one of the devs at Bungie to have been one of the many inspirations for the Marathon cinematic short, where the concept of brain-swapping tech is explored. Keyframe animation played yet another pivotal role to the project, providing a refreshing take where most modern-day high-profile projects are heavily motion captured, losing a lot of the push poses that take Mielgo's projects to heighten realism that very few animation directors have been able to achieve. Several of Alberto's signature camera angles, frantic pace, animation sequences, and stylization can be seen in the cinematic short. Well, that about wraps up this video on how the art director of the Spider-Verse was fired from production, and then went on to revolutionize animation with several awards and prestigious recognitions throughout the 3D animation industry. As for what's next with Alberto Mielgo, according to his website, he's still looking for anyone to email him who wants to create the coolest, most incredible animated feature ever. You might be too late, however, as he has been reported to be working on his first feature film with an independent production company, Stampede. Mielgo is reported to be writing and directing the film based on an original concept. It's a rare thing to come across a filmmaker and world builder with as much ingenuity and panache as Alberto Mielgo, says CEO Greg Silverman. Are you using any of Alberto Mielgo's signature workflows and styles for your personal projects or as a working professional at your studio? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Perfect.